The storms on Viridian 9 had been raging for weeks, battering the surface with relentless rain and howling winds. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating a planet that had become more like a swirling ocean than land. Floodwaters rose rapidly, swallowing forests, cities, and settlements. Only those with speed, luck, or sheer determination could survive. Among them, a Sarathian mother fought to keep herself and her child alive. She was tall and slender, her translucent skin shimmering faintly under the storm's flashes, while her child, barely half her size, clung to her chest with tiny limbs shaking from cold and fear. Their home, a once safe dwelling carved into a cliffside, had collapsed under the force of the floods, leaving them stranded in a narrow canyon where water rushed like a river turned wild. She struggled to keep the child above the rising water, their energy shield flickering weakly, unable to withstand the pressure. The mother called out in the soft, melodic language of the Sarathians, a sound that seemed to harmonize with the storm itself, hoping against hope that someone or something might hear them. Her voice was drowned by the torrential rain, and despair began to creep in. The current was too strong, and even her own strength was fading. She looked into the eyes of her child and felt a surge of determination. She could not give up, not while the little one still clung to her. Above the storm, a human cruiser sliced through the air, engines thrumming with controlled power despite the turbulence. Captain Jace Reynolds had flown through countless dangerous systems, but even he could feel the storm's might testing him as he guided the ship. His dark hair was damp from condensation inside the cockpit, and his eyes scanned the chaotic landscape below, looking for anything that could be considered life or a clue of survivors. He was not searching for aliens or treasure, not specifically, but he was a man of instinct, and his instincts had told him there was something out there, hidden under the torrents. He adjusted the cruiser's sensors, filtering out debris and rainfall, focusing on heat signatures. That's when he saw it, a faint, irregular signature among the chaos. His eyes widened. Someone's down there, he muttered to himself. And they're in trouble. The cruiser tilted sharply as Jace maneuvered closer, dodging falling debris and blasts of wind. Through the storm, he saw a figure struggling in the water. At first, he thought it might be a humanoid debris or a fragment of the planet's buildings. But the movement, the desperate fight against the current, made him realize it was a living being. He leaned forward, squinting through the thick rain. There were two of them, a mother and a small child struggling to stay above the waves, energy shield faltering. Without hesitation, Jace engaged the cruiser's tractor beam. A beam of blue light shot downward, enveloping the Sarathians in a protective pull. The ship shuddered as waves crashed against the canyon walls, and Jace gritted his teeth, adjusting power to stabilize the beam. The mother screamed, not in anger but in sheer relief and surprise as she felt herself being lifted from the floodwaters. The child clung to her, eyes wide with awe, and the mother's hands instinctively pressed the little one to her chest as the beam pulled them upward. Inside the cruiser, the Sarathians were soaked and trembling. The mother's hands flew over the controls of the child's shield, stabilizing it as best she could. Jace worked quickly, activating the environmental controls to warm the cabin and dry the pair. He could feel the tension and fear in them. Though they were physically fragile, their minds seemed sharp, alert, and intelligent. He studied them carefully. Their bodies were unlike anything he had seen before, delicate, luminous, and clearly adapted to a world very different from his own. The translator module on the cruiser beeped as Jace activated it. "Can you understand me?" he asked gently. The mother froze for a moment, then nodded slightly. She tried to speak, her melodic language garbled in the translator. Words began forming on the display. "Flood, alone. Child, help." Jace's eyes narrowed. He understood enough. They had been left behind. Their colony had evacuated, but they had been unable to escape in time. The flood had destroyed their world, and they were surviving purely by luck until he arrived. He crouched beside them, speaking slowly and calmly. "You're safe now. I'm here. My ship will keep you safe." The mother's eyes glistened and she held her child closer. The little Sarathian peeked out from her arms, studying Jace with wide, curious eyes. For a brief moment, the storm outside seemed to fade into the background. There was only the human, this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, strong and determined, and the fragile hope he had brought with him. Jace activated the medical scanner on the child. Its readings were weak. Temperature low, hydration critical, and a rapid heartbeat caused by stress. He carefully administered nutrients through the cruiser's emergency system, while keeping one hand steady on the child's small body. The mother watched him with a mix of gratitude and caution, clearly unaccustomed to trusting outsiders, yet sensing that this human had intentions beyond mere curiosity. As the child began to stabilize, the mother used gestures to show her thanks, touching Jace's arm gently and pointing to the ship's controls. He smiled and nodded, allowing her to explore while ensuring she remained safe. He realized that she was intelligent, capable, and determined, despite the danger they had just endured. There was a resilience in her that reminded him of humanity itself, strong, clever, and unyielding in the face of disaster. Jace glanced out of the window at the planet below. Waves crashed into one another, mountains of water surging violently across the landscape. Lightning struck in jagged lines, illuminating the ruined settlements. The situation was worse than he had imagined. Viridian 9 was not just flooded. The planet's environmental stability was collapsing. The overmining, careless terraforming, and decades of exploitation had left the world weak and unstable. The flood was only the beginning. He turned back to the mother and child. They had survived against impossible odds, but there were likely hundreds more stranded across the planet, struggling in silence. The thought of leaving them behind was unbearable. Jace had a choice: continue alone with his small passengers or risk his cruiser and himself to save more lives. For a long moment he just looked at them, thinking. The mother's eyes met his, and in them he saw trust, hope, and a quiet plea for survival. The child reached out, tiny hand pressing against his arm, and something stirred inside him. A sense of responsibility, a duty that went beyond any mission or contract. "All right," he said finally. "We're not done yet. I'll get you to safety, and I'll do my best to save the others too. Hang on." The cruiser adjusted its course, engines roaring as it navigated the storm. Jace's mind raced as he planned the next steps. He would have to land in unstable regions, dodge debris, and contend with unpredictable currents. But the thought of leaving these aliens or any others behind was impossible. Humanity's strength, he realized, was not just in technology or firepower. It was in courage, ingenuity, and compassion. That was what would allow him to face the storm and continue the rescue. Meanwhile, the mother and child began to relax slightly. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with cautious trust. The child's small limbs pressed against the warmth of Jace's ship, and the mother's hands moved over its body, stabilizing the shield. They could not speak his language fully, yet their understanding was clear. This human was their lifeline, and he had appeared when all hope seemed lost. The storm outside intensified, waves crashing higher, winds battering the cruiser, yet inside the cabin, a quiet determination settled over the group. Jace double-checked the tractor beam and life support systems, readying for the next descent. He would not allow fear or danger to stop him. Humanity, he knew, thrived in adversity, and he was about to prove it, not just for himself, but for every life on the flooded world below. As the cruiser descended toward another canyon, Jace could see faint heat signatures on the planet's surface. There were survivors, maybe a dozen, maybe more, scattered across unstable ground. His hands gripped the controls, eyes sharp, mind focused. The mother guided him as best she could, pointing out areas where she believed others might be trapped. Despite the language barrier, a silent cooperation formed, bridging the gap between species. The first rescue pod launched, a small sphere of reinforced metal and energy shields, diving toward a group of stranded Sarathians clinging to a jagged rock. The storm raged around it, but Jace's control and the mother's guidance ensured the pod reached its target. One by one, he lifted the survivors from danger, each successful extraction strengthening the fragile hope growing in all of them. Hours passed, but Jace showed no sign of fatigue. He had faced storms, alien attacks, and collapsing worlds before, but this was different. This was about lives depending entirely on his courage and humanity. Each time a Sarathian was pulled aboard safely, he felt a quiet satisfaction, proof that humans could shine even in the darkest situations, that bravery and care could tip the balance between life and death. By the time Part 1 draws to a close, the cruiser hovers over a calmer region, a temporary haven in the chaos. The mother cradles her child, now sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. The humans and aliens have formed an unspoken bond, forged in the shared struggle against nature's fury. Jace gazes down at the flood below, knowing Jace Reynolds watched the storm-racked planet below, its surface a chaotic swirl of rushing water and debris. From orbit, Viridian 9 looked almost peaceful, a distant blue and green orb cloaked in clouds. But he knew better. The danger was real and relentless, and time was slipping away with every crashing wave. The Sarathian mother held her child tightly, her translucent skin now reflecting the dim cabin lights, her small gestures a silent communication of trust. The human captain's mind was already calculating the next move. He had rescued dozens of survivors already, yet more signals flickered faintly across the sensors. Heat signatures indicated scattered groups, each clinging to precarious rocks or floating debris. It was a race against nature itself, a contest of speed, courage, and clever planning. Jace adjusted the cruiser's course toward the largest cluster. He activated the ship's external cameras to get a better view. There were at least 15 Sarathians trapped on a narrow cliff, battered by waves and lashing rain. Some were injured, others weak from cold. One young adult struggled to maintain a grip on a slippery rock, while a small group clutched one another, trembling. The mother beside him pointed with an urgent gesture, guiding him toward the group. She could not speak his language fully, but her intentions were clear. Her eyes held a mix of fear, hope, and determination. She wanted these people saved, and she trusted him to do it. Jace nodded to her, silently acknowledging the trust placed in him. "All right," he said. "We're going down. Stay calm, everyone. We're going to get them." The cruiser descended into the storm, turbulence shaking the hull. Lightning illuminated the cliffs in jagged flashes, revealing the sheer danger of the operation. Jace deployed multiple rescue pods, reinforced with energy shields to withstand the pounding water. Each pod was equipped with life support units and small energy tethers designed to pull survivors aboard. The first pod struck the water with a hiss and a splash. Jace guided it carefully toward the young adult struggling on the cliff edge. Waves crashed around them, but the pod's shields deflected the worst of the force. The Sarathian climbed in, trembling but alive. Jace watched as the pod's sensors confirmed life signs were stable. Another pod followed, lifting a group of children and elderly survivors with care, the energy tether securing them safely. Inside the cruiser, the mother comforted her child, occasionally reaching over to help stabilize a pod as it docked. Though small, she was surprisingly strong, her gestures precise and effective. Jace marveled at her resolve. She had faced impossible odds and survived, and now she assisted in saving her people. It was a quiet reminder that intelligence and courage were not limited to humans alone. Hours passed. The storm worsened. Waves were taller, the wind stronger, and the rain heavier. Yet Jace continued the rescue with unwavering focus. He landed the pods in safer areas whenever possible, even using parts of the canyon walls to shield them from the worst of the currents. Each successful extraction brought relief, but also an awareness that the planet's instability was accelerating. At one point, a massive wave struck a section of the cliff, sending rocks and debris tumbling into the water below. Jace's heart leaped into his throat as a small pod was thrown off course. Without hesitation, he activated the cruiser's secondary thrusters, pushing against the current with incredible precision. The pod stabilized just in time, and the survivors inside were unharmed. The mother let out a soft sigh of relief, her eyes glistening as she clutched her child closer. The storm finally began to subside slightly, though the floodwaters remained treacherous. Jace knew the planet's core instability meant that the danger would return, and possibly worse than before. Landslides and volcanic eruptions were not impossible, and each action had to be deliberate, calculated, and swift. He decided to make one final sweep for survivors. The remaining Sarathians were scattered across small islands of debris, clinging to floating wreckage from destroyed settlements. Jace maneuvered the cruiser with precision, guided by the mother's subtle gestures and the ship's sensors. He deployed smaller rescue drones for the most difficult reaches, each capable of carrying one or two survivors at a time. The drones zipped across the floodwaters, avoiding jagged rocks and swirling currents. One by one, the last Sarathians were rescued. A family of 4 was pulled from a half-submerged building. A group of teenagers was lifted from a torn section of a bridge, and a lone elder was carefully brought aboard using the ship's tether. Every rescue brought the group closer together, forming a small but resilient community aboard the cruiser. Finally, Jace took a moment to breathe. The mother and child were safe, and the dozens of other Sarathians he had saved were beginning to recover from their ordeal. The child, now warm and secure, rested against the mother's chest, eyes half closed in exhaustion. The mother's gaze met Jace's, filled with gratitude that words could not express. She had trusted a human stranger, and he had delivered beyond all expectation. "Is everyone okay?" Jace asked gently, scanning the cabin. The survivors nodded, some weakly, some with more energy returning as they adjusted to the safety of the cruiser. The mother finally spoke, using the translator to convey a simple message. "You saved our lives." "We owe you everything." Jace shook his head, smiling slightly. "No, you didn't owe anything. I did what anyone would do if they could. You're alive. That's what matters." For a long while they remained in quiet recovery. The storm outside persisted in the distance, but the cruiser provided warmth, safety, and stability. Jace reflected on what had just occurred. Humanity, he realized, had a strength that went beyond weapons or technology. It was courage, compassion, and an unwillingness to abandon those in need. Against overwhelming odds, he had acted decisively and effectively. That was humanity's true power, and it had just saved an entire species from extinction. Over the next hours, the rescued Sarathians began to explore the cruiser. They marveled at the technology, at the life support systems, at the artificial gravity that allowed them to move freely, without fear of drowning or falling. Jace allowed them to touch the controls carefully, explaining basic functions through gestures and the translator. In return, they shared glimpses of their knowledge, subtle ways of reading energy flows, natural survival techniques, and hints of their culture. Even in their weakest moments, their intelligence shone, and Jace realized this was a species worth protecting, not just for their lives, but for the wisdom they carried. But the planet below still posed a threat. Viridian 9's instability was worsening faster than Jace had anticipated. Sensors detected seismic activity along the flooded regions, and the storm's fury had not fully abated. Jace made the difficult decision to move the survivors to a safer location, a nearby orbital station designed for emergency evacuations. It was a long journey, but the cruiser's engines hummed with steady power, carrying them away from imminent danger. During the journey, Jace spent time observing the mother and child. The bond between them was clear, a connection stronger than any language barrier. The child clung to the mother, but occasionally reached out to touch Jace's hand or gaze at the control panels. The mother watched closely, adjusting her child's position, yet her eyes often met Jace's with a quiet acknowledgement. She had seen bravery in a human, courage she had thought was rare across the stars. Hours later, the cruiser approached the orbital station. The structure was massive, with multiple docking bays and emergency life support systems. Jace skillfully maneuvered the ship toward the primary docking bay, sensors alert for any hazards. The Sarathians watched, awestruck, as the station loomed above, a beacon of safety in the chaos. Docking was precise, and soon the survivors were guided into the station, where medical teams quickly attended to the injured and weak. The mother and child were among the first to be assisted. Jace stood back, observing the interactions. The Sarathians were beginning to recover, and their expressions showed not only relief but wonder. They had been saved not by luck alone, but by a human who had faced storms, danger, and overwhelming odds without hesitation. As the mother and child were settled, she approached Jace. Her hands moved carefully, holding his with delicate strength. Through the translator, she said, "We will never forget what you did. Humanity is remarkable." Jace smiled, a sense of quiet pride settling over him. "Just remember this," he said softly. "Courage and compassion, those are what make humans strong. You don't have to fear the universe if you have that." The mother nodded, and for a moment the chaos of the planet below, the storm and the floods, seemed distant, almost irrelevant. The bond formed in the face of disaster had changed something fundamental. A species that had been abandoned now saw humanity in a new light, capable of bravery, ingenuity, and unwavering care. As the orbital station powered up its systems, preparing to transport the Sarathians to a safer colony, Jace looked back at Viridian 9 through the viewing window. The planet was still dangerous, unpredictable, and unforgiving. But for the first time, he felt that his actions had made a tangible difference, not just for the Sarathians aboard his cruiser, but for the future interactions between species. Humanity had shown it could rise above fear and adversity, and that was a lesson worth remembering. The mother held her child close one last time, before the transport shuttle took them away to